Hello and welcome to the Christ Baptist Church devotional as we're making our way through the book of Genesis. We've gone through Genesis 1 to 9. We've just finished the flood and actually got to the covenant of the rainbow just after the flood, where God had promised he'd never again flood the earth. So we never have to worry about the earth being flooded, no matter what scientists or people might say. We know from God's promise the earth is never going to be flooded again. And every time you see a rainbow, that just reminds you of that promise that is there. And that promise really shows us that God is a God of grace who spares his people from his own wrath that's coming, that came to purify the earth with the flood. And so we've seen that up to Genesis chapter 1 all the way through chapter 9. And then we now are going to be at a chapter that explains where all the nations came from. We did see last devotion that Genesis 9 verse 19, from these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. So everybody on the earth ever, no matter what country they're from, came from Shem, Ham, or Japheth. They came from their ultimate grandfathers off of the boat, the three sons of Noah. So they are the fathers of everybody on the earth. And now what we see in chapter 10 is going to be where this split takes place, where these nations come from. And this is going to just pave the way for us for chapter 11, which is going to answer the question, where do all of our differences come from? Our differences largely relate to language, and then eventually as we separate around language, we develop our own culture and our own ways of doing things and how we operate. And so we're going to see where those differences, those different languages come from, and whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. And so now we'll take a look at Genesis chapter 10 and see where a lot of these things are coming from. And there's some interesting observations here in this. It just seems like a long kind of, not quite a genealogy, but a list of names that are difficult to pronounce. And we're going to just take a look at these quickly. Genesis chapter 10. Let's just follow here. Now these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. The sons were born to them after the flood. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth, this is their book of their, this is kind of like their scrapbook. Everybody gets a scrapbook in Genesis. So Noah got it, Adam got it. And so this is the scrapbook of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. And they had sons born to them after the flood, and here they are. And we start with Japheth. And Japheth, we believe, is probably the maybe the oldest it could be. It's a little bit difficult to see, but we know that Ham is the youngest because we saw that in Genesis chapter 9 and coming in. And so now we see in Genesis chapter 10, after verse 1, these are the records of the three boys that came off the, well, not young men that came off the boat. So beginning in verse 2, we now have the sons of Japheth. And here's the sons of Japheth. Here they are. Just kind of go over them. Sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. That's a mouthful there. And the first, we see the first son was Gomer, and then we get his sons in verse 3. Gomer, kind of interesting name. Is that Gomer is in South Africa. You guys here, the South Africans, use the word oak to refer to some guy. When I grew up with the word Gomer. So you say, who's that oak? I say, who's that Gomer? Well, Gomer was the first one who was born out of Japheth. So out of those three sons, here comes Gomer. And the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarmah. And just to give you an idea where these people come from, did a little research on that. And I know that Ashkenaz here, he's the son of Gomer there. Ashkenaz is going to be more the Germans or the Germanic people that come up. And Ashkenazi, that's where a group that came from them, the Ashkenazis. And the Riphath, those people, the second group out of Gomer, those are what's called the Carpathians. And Togarmah is going to be the Armenians, like out of Turkey. So that kind of Asia Minor area, along with the Germanic peoples, they those people who live in that area today. It wasn't that area today. Remember, after the flood and the waters receded, the land is still in one spot. There's one big giant continent, one big giant landmass. It's all connected. There aren't different continents in the ocean. It's all one place. I'm going to show you that. The Bible indicates that. And so these people here, by their names, Ashkenaz, Riphtah, and Togarmah, they eventually, and I'm going to show you when eventually happens, eventually they turned into the German people and the Carpathians and the Armenians, which is like the Turks. Now the second batch, Gomer's brother, here's a guy called Javan. Now you've got Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal right there. And so the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz and Riphtah. We read that. Now the sons of Javan, who is Javan? Javan is the Greeks. A J is like an I in Hebrew. It's like a Y sound as an I, and it's the Ionians. Ionia, that's Greek. So the Greek islands, Greek areas there were Elisha and Tarshish and Kittim and Dodanim. And those are areas that take you around the area of the Greek. You can see it's Tarsus of Spain and Carthage in North Africa, in that kind of region there. Cyprus, Rhodes. There's Tobolsk. Tubal is really from the Russian city of Tobolsk. And Meshech is come from Muscovy, which is Moscow, Russia, ultimately where these names come from. And so we've got that. And Tiras is the Thracians, which is kind of Italy, the Etruscans, and that group. And so all of these people you can see is right around the area of Greece, Turkey, Asia Minor, in that area, North Africa, Carthage, that whole part of the Mediterranean group. Now, it wasn't the Mediterranean back then. It was, again, one big landmass. These are the sons of Japheth that began to grow out. They spread out. And they created these people groups who became people groups. They weren't created people groups. They were the sons, ultimately, of Japheth. You had the sons of Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, and these sons became fathers. Then they had sons, they became fathers, and they are the people who today live in that area. But back then, they were all just grouped in one family clan kind of area. So that's Japheth. Sons of Ham begins in verse 6, goes all the way down basically to verse 20. So Ham is a bit more. So we don't put Ham in the last. We start with Japheth, then we go to Ham. Ham's the youngest. Sons of Ham were Cush and Mitzrayim and Put and Canaan. And so Cush is all the people who kind of went in the area of Arabia. The sons of Cush were Seba and Havilah and Sabta and Ramah and Sabteka. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. We don't know anything else about them, but we know all those people from Havilah. As you go from Havilah to Shur, you've seen that in some of the Old Testament sayings. And that is the area of Arabia, the Arabian countries that are all right there. Those people groups came from the sons of Cush. So Cushites are going to be the Arabian kind of people. But now we have this little interlude here from verses 8 to 12. I want to draw your attention there, verses 8 to 12, a very specific little story. Anytime there's a little story, it's important. You take a note because he's breaking it out saying, I want you to know this. Cush also became the father of a man named Nimrod. Nimrod. And just growing up for me, and Nimrod was somebody who was goofy. So Nimrod was somebody who was just, he's the guy you make fun of. Well, Nimrod is someone that's pulled out here. Now, what kind of a person is he? Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth, a Gibor, a warrior kind of person on the earth. Does that mean that we respect this person and go, well, let's take a look. He was a mighty hunter, a Gibor hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. So in the presence of the Lord, he was in his mind mighty. It wasn't mean he was giving might to God or he was respecting God. It was like he was saying to God, I myself am somebody. I am a mighty hunter. And he went off to create his own kingdom. Notice verse 10. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech and Akkad and Calneh and the land of Shinar. So 3 important words come in here. First is the word kingdom. It's the first use of the word kingdom in the Bible. First use of the word kingdom. And it belongs to Nimrod. Second is, the beginning of it was Babel. We're going to learn about that in the next devotion, chapter 11. And it was also in the land of Shinar, which is also in chapter 11. So this tells us right here, Nimrod is really, in his time, Nimrod, whose father was Cush, whose father was Ham. So only 2 generations here from Ham and 3 generations from Noah is a man named Nimrod, who actually is the founder of Babel in Shinar. And he was such a warrior kind of person. He went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh and Rehoboth, Ur, and Calah, and Resen, and Nineveh, and Calah. That is the great city. So he established Nineveh. This is the Persian area, the area where the Persians are, Iran, and those areas there that deal with kind of where Assyria was. And I want you to take note, it's a foreshadowing here of Babel and Shinar, which we're going to find in chapter 11, a man named Nimrod, who is noted to be, in his own mind, a mighty hunter before the Lord. I don't think that's positive. That's negative, meaning he was not humble. He wasn't like Enosh, where men began to call upon the name of the Lord, and we're going to see this in chapter 11. Well, that's a Cush, the son of Ham. Mitzrayim is the second son of Ham. Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. So it gives you the idea of the kind of the African, North African people. He became the father of Ludim and Anamim and Lehabim and Naphtuhim, Pathrusim and Casluhim, from which came the Philistines and Caphtorim. So there we go, a little note right there, very important for us to understand, from which came the Philistines. The Philistines. What do we know about the Philistines? They came ultimately from the Anakim and the Nephilim. They're tall people. Goliath. There's even a man in the book of 2 Samuel who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Philistines. So they came from all the way, ultimately, from this son Mitzrayim, who's really the whole idea of Egypt and all the surrounding North African countries came from him. And then we get to Canaan, verse 15. And we've talked about Canaan in the last devotion. Canaan, he became the father of Sidon. Sidon is the city that's just north of Jerusalem, a couple, about 300-400 kilometers that it's up there. Canaan became the father of Sidon. We always hear Tyre and Sidon up there in the north. His firstborn, and Heth. And then we get all these ites. All these ites. The Jebusite, the Amorite, the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Archite, the Sinite, the Arvadite, the Zemarite, the Hamathite, and afterward the families of the Canaanite were spread abroad. There they go. These are all the people who were the enemies of Israel. Israel went to go destroy all these people in the land of Canaan. And the territory of the Canaanite extended from Sidon as you go toward Gerar, as far as Gaza. Gaza is a term we even know today. We hear this in the news, called the Gaza Strip. There's the West Bank in Israel, and then there's the Gaza Strip, occupied by there's a group of Palestinians that are there that are called Palestinians. That's where the Philistines actually lived. You'd see it in the book of 1 Samuel. The Philistines lived in Gaza. You'd see it all the way through the book of Joshua. Just coming through, Gaza is a capital city of the Philistines. It's Canaanite territory that was promised to Israel by God to Abraham as we get to that part. But it goes from Gerar to Gaza, you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admon Zeboim as far as Lashah. That's all what's going to belong to Ham through the Canaanites there from verse 15 down to verse 19. And these are all the enemies of Israel. So Mitzrayim, his brother, had all the North Africans, really, that took that part, but it wasn't Africa back then. Remember, it was all one big piece of land. There was no Africa, there was no Asia, there was no Mediterranean Sea. It was all just one big piece of land. And these are the families that kind of lived in their clans on the land. But notice verse 20 and 21. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families. I said that. And look here, according to their languages, by their lands, by their nations. Verse 20 says, according to their languages, by their lands, by the nations. Look what we see in verse 5. Here's everything that's dealing with the sons of Japheth. From the coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to their language. So they're separated according to their language. The Japhethites are separated according to their language. The Hamites are separated according to their language. How did this happen? Where did this separation come from? Well, going to find out. Verse 21. Now we're talking about Shem. Also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, and the older brother of Japheth, children were born. So we get the idea here that maybe Shem is actually older than Japheth, and Japheth is the middle person, and then Ham, of course, is the last. But another reading, if you look in your cross-reference in your little notes, there's a little number there, and it could also read, also to Shem, the brother of Japheth the elder. So we don't really know exactly. You could read either way, but we do know that Ham is the youngest. We're not so sure whether Japheth is the oldest or Shem is the oldest, but we know that both of them are over Canaan. But what's interesting here is it's pointed out that he's the father of all the children of Eber. Well, who in the world is Eber? We haven't gotten Eber yet. So let's find out about the sons of Shem. Sons of Shem were Elam and Asher and Arphaxad and Lud and Aram. So here's all the sons of Shem. Elam is, we see a record of him in Genesis 14 of a king named Chedorlaomer, king of Elam. So Elam is a city that was settled out of one of the sons of Shem, as well as Asher, who is really the founder of the Assyrians. So Asher, Assyrians, are actually from Shem, the Shemites. We can see the Assyrians had Nineveh, and they would have been tangling up there with the sons of Ham and Nimrod, but they were there. And then there's Arphaxad, who was born 2 years after the flood, and Shelah is born. But Arphaxad and Lud and Aram. And Aram is where you get the Arameans or the Syrians. So now we're in that Middle Eastern area. So we've got all the peoples who eventually found their way in the coastlands around the Greece and Italy and Spain and Germany and Russia and those areas. We saw the people who settled in what is more the North African region and settling eventually down into Africa, and now the Middle East, which is here the Syrians, the Arameans, and that. That's where the Shemites tended to go. Remember, it's all one big piece of land. It's not a bunch of different. Don't be thinking the world as it is today. It just was one big piece of land, and they were all there by their clans living there. So we start off with the sons of Aram here. Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. Well, there they all are. And we know that Job's homeland was Uz, from the land of Uz. And so that's where we understand about the book of Job was actually older than when Moses had written, because Job wrote it, or somebody who knew Job wrote it there, before Moses was around. So, sons of Aram were there. Now, Arphaxad, verse 24, he became the father of Shelah, and Shelah became the father of Eber. as we can trace this, where they begin to follow the lines, that's going to be what's important to us, and we're going to see that in chapter 11. But Arphaxad became the father of Shelah, and Shelah became the father of Eber. There we go, Eber. That's the guy in verse 21, where Shem was the father of all the children of Eber. Why did he bring Eber out here? Why is Eber so special? Well, there's two things. The one is the word Eber, or Eber, in Hebrew. It's where we're going to get the word Hebrew. To cross over. Aber. So that's his name. We say Eber. Eber is more how you'd say it in Hebrew. Well, one thing we know about Eber, or Eber, in verse 25. 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. There we go, right there. What's so special about Eber? Well, in his days, in Eber's days, this word where we actually get the word Hebrew, Abram the Hebrew, Eber, how it's related. In those days of his time, we don't know how old he was, but in his days, the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Divided. What do we mean divided? It means that's when the continental drift happened. That's when the land began to separate into what are now the continents, who are separated by the bodies of water. It was all land, and the rest of the world was water, but basically the land started to separate out, and the people then were separated by their clans and by their languages. But did they speak languages differently there? No, they didn't. They all spoke the same language. We're going to see that coming up. They absolutely all spoke the same language because they're all from the same, essentially, great-grandfathers. Came off the boat. It's not very long. Verse 26, Joktan, who's the brother of Eber, he became the father of Almadad and Sheleph and Hazmaveth and Jerah and Hadoram and Uzal and Diklah and Obal and Abimael and Sheba and Ophir and Havilah and Jobab, and all these were the sons of Joktan. List all these guys here. You can list them and make a name. There's nothing else recorded about them, and they're not going to be as important because when we get to chapter 11, they're not mentioned. Why? Because we follow the line of Eber. We follow his line. That's what's important. Why? Because that's where the seed is. That's what we're watching. We're watching the flow of the seed. I mean, it's all the people on the earth are being populated. It's populating across one big landmass, and then God split the landmasses into various places, and people went with that landmass and spoke different languages that went in there, but the seed is only in one spot. And our challenge is to find out where that seed is. Well, we know in verse 30, their settlement extended from Mesha as you go to Sephar, the hill country to the east. These are the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, according to their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, by their nations, and out of these the nations were separated on the earth after the flood. There we see it again. They were separated. They were split apart. What made them separate? The earth was divided. The earth began to divide, and the people went with those land masses as they divided. And they went according to their clans, which we're going to see is according to their languages. We're going to see how God did that in the next devotion. Right now, what you want to see is God is absolutely faithful in repopulating the earth. It could have been chaos with these people. They could have killed each other. It could have been all of that. But it wasn't. God was faithful. Out of these, the whole earth was populated. And what do we see in the very next chapter? The earth began to be populated. God is faithful. The earth was populated out of the 3 sons of Noah, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. There they go. And they're listed. And we saw the people groups that were in the Grecian, Cyprus, Rhodes, kind of Mediterranean area with the islands. The people up by Germany and Russia, Armenia, Turkey, in those areas there. the people in North Africa there. But again, there wasn't, that's where those people are now, but where they were before was all together on the same landmass, and these were those people groups. They tended to be like their families, how their ultimate fathers raised them, and what accents they had, and all of that kind of thing. They were all together. But eventually the earth was divided in the days of Eber. And they rode those continental drifts, land masses, and settled there and had their own cultures as they developed. And that's how we have such a diverse population today, because the people were settled by their families individually. And then we're going to see in the next devotion how they changed culture completely through language. And we're going to see that. And we're going to also, what we do know about language is that languages develop. They come and they go. Some languages are fairly new. Not every language came from way back when. English is a language that wasn't back then. It was a product of eventually the Roman Empire coming into Europe and people giving slang, and eventually tones change and words change, and it just goes. And then we have English, and it changes. We have different kinds of English, for sure. And that's just English. We have the many other kinds of languages that some are only a couple hundred years old or 150 years old. Others are longer than that. And everybody separates from that into their cultures, their languages as they go. And that's what we see in Genesis chapter 10, beginning with the sons of Noah, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. God is faithful in doing that, everybody according to their language, as the earth was split. And we're going to see where that came from in Genesis chapter 11 and how that ties into the main story of Genesis. But through this, we can use this to say, I know that the seed is actually going to be in Shem. We know that because Jesus is tied directly to the line of Judah, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. We know that for sure because that's what the Bible tells us. So he's going to be a Shemite, and that's where Jesus is. So we're going to see you then on the next devotion. Excuse me. So we're going to see you then on the next devotion.